Varmt välkomna till Europahuset för dagens webbinarium som arrangeras i samarbete eller faktiskt med ansvar från Pan-Europarörelsen. Och jag heter Christian Danielsson och jag är chef för EU-kommissionens representation här i Stockholm. Och dagens webbinarium det kommer diskutera EUs vaccinstrategi. Och frågan vi kommer ställa oss är, har den fungerat? Och med det lämnar jag över till Gunnar Hökmark som kommer leda diskussionen.
Tack så hemskt mycket och än en gång välkomna till detta seminarium som vi är glada att få arrangera tillsammans med EU-kommissionen och svenska Pan-Europarörelsen. Vi har den bästa möjliga panel för att diskutera detta. Jag tänkte faktiskt efter innan jag skulle säga detta om det stämmer, men det är den bästa möjliga panelen. We have Mrs. Andrea Amon, who is head of the European Center for Disease Prevention and Control. We have the National Coordinator for Vaccine in Sweden, Richard Bergström, and we have Christian Danielsson. And as you have noticed, we will do this in English because we feel that a virus is international, and are we going to discuss it, we need to do it in a national level. So once again, very welcome, and the idea is to highlight different perspectives on what has happened, what we can learn from that, and what we should do in the future, but also what will be going on in the next phase. And in order to do this, I would like to start with giving Richard Bergström the floor. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Gunnar. Thank you so much. And thank you for the opportunity to talk about this very important topic. And great to stand here in front of the beautiful flags here, both the country that I know best and the EU, of course. So as you probably know, I'm representing Sweden in the steering board for the procurement of vaccines for Europe, and I'm also one of the negotiators in the inner team. And I have the pleasure of working every day with the Commission team, which is a very broad team. It's seated in DG Santé. So I think in a way, Andrea, you and I have in a way the same boss, the Director General, Sandra Gallina. But also the team is very broad. It draws upon skills from the legal services. Quite a few people from Santé involved, the regulatory experts. We have people with experience from trade negotiations, and lately also we have support from DG Grow, which is the competitiveness side of the Commission, with Commissioner Breton very active. So it's really a very broad team mobilizing to address this very important topic. I think what I'd like to say at the outset, I think you're all aware of the fact that the EU member states are negotiating together. So we've entrusted the European Commission with signing advanced purchase agreements. And we have to think about when this came about in May, June. At that point in time, we had no vaccines. We didn't even know if we would get vaccines. We had many experts that said, oh, you know, it usually takes 10 years. The most optimistic persons, also coming from the industry, said, oh, maybe 4 years. And here we are now. You know, it took the sector 10 months to get approved vaccines. Now it's taken longer to get the volumes, and we get back to that, I'm sure, that now the factories are there, and they're producing a lot. Okay, we'll come back to the numbers later. But at that time, when the question was posed, okay, what do we do about the vaccines? Many of the experts, so many of Andrea Aman's colleagues in the network in Europe said, well, we don't know which ones will work. mRNA vaccines, which was then discussed, well, actually, many experts said, we don't believe in them. We actually have in writing from some public health agencies in Europe that, you know, we shouldn't invest in them. I'm glad we did. So this is, I want to highlight this, and maybe Andrea Aman would like to comment on this later, because this is an interplay between the science and the evidence-based approach, and yet a political process. Because who takes the responsibility to say, I will not invest in Pfizer or Moderna, or I will only invest in AstraZeneca, or I will only do Sanofi, or I will only do this and that? Who takes that responsibility? The politicians. So that's very clear. I think that's very important. That was the charge that the European Commission led, and particularly Commission President Ursula von der Leyen personally, who, by the way, also has a background in this field. She's actually a trained medical doctor, and I believe one of her first jobs was to work with disease prevention in Northern Westfalen, I understand. So I'm sure that has taught her a lot about the importance of this whole subject. So very political decision, mindful of the fact that we all have to stick together. We had very sad experience in the spring with closed borders between member states. We have the example, we have a Swedish medtech company called Mölnlycke, very big in wound care and other things, and they have their central supply center in Paris, to which they import things from all over the world, right? And they were blocked from shipping things out of France because there was a export stop on equipment. So learning from that, not a proud moment for the EU, learning from that, combined with what I said about these political choices, somebody had to take charge. And miraculously, in a way, I mean, still don't know how this happened. It happened within a matter of days, that all the member states agreed that the Commission will drive this, with all the member states sitting there at the table. And that's very important. And I see that when we compare, for instance, with some of the other initiatives like COVAX, which is a great international endeavor, which all the EU member states and the Commission is supporting. But it has had some challenges, because you need to have a clear accountability link with the health services in the countries. So I report to the Swedish Minister of Health, to the Swedish cabinet, and they ultimately take the responsibility, of course. And they have the money, by the way, to pay for the vaccines. So myself and my colleagues, we have a mandate from all our governments to sit there, and we have to balance always the input we get from the experts with the political need to make investments. And many people were skeptical and said, oh, you know, you are investing in all these vaccines. Why so many? And why so many billion doses? Well, we needed to. Partly to make sure that we have the capacity to manufacture, which we now harvest the fruits from, but also that we didn't know what would work. These mRNA vaccines, which are now actually the biggest in our Swedish portfolio, we didn't know if they would work or how safe they would be. And now they're enormously effective with 95% effectiveness. Who would have believed? And safety profile very, very, very positive. In addition, we didn't know which companies would be able to deliver. And we did invest heavily in AstraZeneca. It was supposed to be our biggest vaccine here in Sweden during the first quarter. Unfortunately, they've had manufacturing problems. So we've received fewer doses from AstraZeneca than planned. We didn't know. But that's also why we had to really invest broadly and not put all eggs in the same basket, which is saying that we use often here in Sweden, you know, don't lägg inte alla egg in samma korg, which we really did not do by having this broad portfolio. So I think it's very important. I want to stress that point of combining scientific excellence and an evidence approach to decision making while taking political, financial risks in making sure that we have vaccines for our population, not only now, but also going forward. I'm sure we come back to that later in the discussion around the need to have updated vaccines for the years to come to deal with mutations. I'm sure Andrea Mann would like to address this issue of the variants as well in her statement. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just a short question. If you look back, what would you see could have been the room for alternatives or different strategies? If you started last May, discussion here. If you look back at that time, I mean, with a respect for not knowing what would be, but if you just would like to assess how priorities could have been done otherwise, or what we could have lost even more.
Well, it's an excellent question, because you know, what could have happened in this scenario would be that a few member states would go together, and in fact we actually had that. What triggered the EU Commission to be so bold was the fact that 4 member states, and not the smallest ones, pretty important ones, Germany, France, Italy, and the Netherlands, they charged ahead and signed a principal agreement with AstraZeneca. And then it took a week, and then the EU essentially took over. So that could have happened, that a few member states would collaborate with each other. It could be that one member state, and we had those examples where the experts said, oh, we believe in AstraZeneca, it's inexpensive, you know, Oxford University, very, very good. That's enough. We buy that one only. And we have member states not buying maybe the Pfizer vaccine. Maybe even countries that manufacture it. It's actually coming out of Belgium. The last step is in Belgium. And it was not a given that Belgium would have a contract with Pfizer. So you know, it could have been that we actually would have had, and then sitting here now, the leaders would be scrambling, because then they would be arguing with each other. Oh, please, can I borrow some of your Pfizer doses? And I didn't get any AstraZeneca. Can I get from you? So fortunately, we now have all the same contracts, and there's been a bit of reshuffling of doses, as you're aware. But it could have been that, I think all governments would have done something, but it probably would have done something very splintered, and which could have resulted in a really bad situation, I think.
And as things came out, we had more eggs in more baskets, so to say.
Together.
And together, yes. Well, Andrea, please, the floor is yours. And Richard highlighted some things, and I know that you would like to highlight also some things. So please, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much for organizing this seminar, because I think the topic is very timely. And I also would like to stress that I think this, what Richard mentioned, this combination of evidence-based science and political decision is a feature that is seen throughout the whole pandemic, not only for the vaccines. We saw this in other aspects as well. So before I want to go a bit more where we are right now with the vaccine rollout, I want to highlight what our role is in this strategy, the role of our agency. And so we have been working actually since last late summer with very closely with the member states, and with their national immunization technical advisory groups called NITAGs, to develop common frameworks and principles, how to roll out, whom to prioritize. So we had intensive discussions how the prioritization of these vaccinations should happen. And we still have now ongoing this dialogue, which is very important as the rollout goes on, more information becomes available, and maybe vaccine strategies, national vaccine strategies need to be adjusted. So we have also since now we have first of all then also done stress tests with the member states where they could test the whole procedure, how to roll out before the vaccines became available, just to be confident that they would manage the process. And then, since now the vaccines become available, we are closely monitoring the rollout. We have this vaccine tracker that is, depending on the information that we get reported from the member states. This is why it's always a bit later than the figures that are published on the national websites. So, and what we get reported is the total number of doses delivered, the total number of doses distributed, and that by manufacturer, the number of first and second doses by manufacturer and target group. So it's pretty detailed picture that we can analyze. We also monitor the pace of the administration to see where there are hiccups, and I come to these in a minute. Then last week we had, actually, I think this is a very important milestone, this joint advisory board together with the Medicines Agency, where we have now a platform where we monitor the safety and effectiveness, the real world effectiveness of these vaccines. So EMA is doing the safety monitoring, and we are doing the effectiveness monitoring. And we have then also now published a guidance on what fully vaccinated people should consider, how they can relax or not relax measures. Now, at the moment where we are in the EU, with the virus really widely still circulating, and the rollout only step by step catching up, we still are unfortunately in the situation that we still have to follow all these measures. I mean, you are not standing closely together for a reason, and that's exactly what we have. So at the moment, countries are still pointing out that they have limited supply. That is supposed to be better very, very soon. And this is also why countries are, stretching the period between the first and the second dose to the maximum allowed by the regulator to make best use of what they have. Countries are also preparing for a mass rollout to accelerate when more doses become available, and creating, reserve lists so that nothing goes to waste, and also putting in place communication campaigns to really motivate everybody to get the vaccine. Of course, the variants are circulating, and we are also monitoring those, in particular for those variants that might induce a reduction in the effectiveness of the vaccines. And so far, there is only one of them, that the variants of concern, that is really where there are concerns regarding the effectiveness. That's the variant that was first discovered in South Africa. But all the other variants, there is still an effectiveness there, so there is no reason not to get vaccinated for the variants. So coming to the end of my introduction, the lesson that we have learned is that we really have to have a coordinated approach in the EU, but maybe even globally, to create trust and assurance and consistency. We have seen that we are even more connected globally than we thought, and that also no country alone can deal with such a pandemic of this magnitude alone. So we have learned that only if we are sticking together, we're also safe together.
Thank you very much. Before I leave the floor to Christian here, could you just tell me what would be your view on the upsides and downsides with the rollout as it has been the last 6 months?
I mean, the upside is definitely that even though at times there were hiccups in the deliveries, but we knew they would come, the whole process that Richard also described with getting hold of the vaccines, that was done. So countries could be confident they would get at one point the vaccines, and they could vaccinate their citizens. So that is, in my view, definitely a positive side. And we saw, of course, that also countries had their difficulties in their countries setting up with the vaccine hesitancy, with misinformation, and that is something that could not have been avoided anyway, in my view.
Okay, thank you very much. Christian, please, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. I thought perhaps I go into three issues. One is to say 2 words on what Richard already spoke about, namely where we are today and the background to it. And secondly, I thought of saying 2 words about the future. And finally, 2 words about the international scene. Now, on where we are right now, I think we've gone through what is very common in EU decision making, not to the size that we have seen. Namely, it comes something which we were not prepared for at all. The first step is panic, and that's what we saw in March last year among member states. And naturally, they looked to themselves. What to do with my citizens? What to do in my country? The second was recognition that we need to work together and putting together something on the basis of what existed. And here I think it's important to recognize that public health is primarily the responsibility of the member states, which means that anything that would needed to be set up didn't exist. It was new stuff. What Richard was sitting in was new. What Andreas' responsibilities are right now was partly new. And that by itself creates complexity. And the third is where we are right now. And what can we say about the result? I think it's quite impressive. As Richard pointed to, nobody had thought that vaccines should be on the table 10 months after the process started. Nobody would probably have thought that we would have a system whereby all member states are receiving vaccines. And the downside here would be what Richard pointed to. Just think the thought that we would have 4 or 5 member states being able to get vaccine and the others not. What that would have meant politically for the European Union as such. And thirdly, I think we are in a situation now where the whole issue of vaccine delivery is really speeding up. I think there was 18 million vaccines delivered in January. I think this month, Richard knows this much better, I think we are close to 120 or something. Yep. And we are going to have a delivery of nearly 300 million more vaccines.
Just repeat that.
Yes.
120 millions doses.
This month, yes. This week is 30 million doses.
Yes, it's big numbers. I think it's
huge numbers. It's huge numbers. And I just got the figure here that I think today to the EU 164 million doses have been delivered. 164 million doses. And this is in 4 months' time. So I think we need to have that in mind. What did not go as well? Well, maybe we were a bit too optimistic. I mean, we all wanted to have vaccine the day after. And maybe the figures we went out with did not really take into consideration how complex it is to produce vaccine and the risk that the production chains will be affected. And that happened. And that created the kind of criticisms that were about in January, February, and March. So that is it's sort of situation where we are right now. Looking forward, I think there needs to be a reflection, and a fairly serious reflection on how we should what we should look like in the European Union in order to be better prepared. And that is something that boils down to the role of Andreas agency. I mean, I'm taken by the fact that every single country have their own recommendations as regards certain vaccines. Who should get it? 55 years old, 65 years old, 60 years old. Does that create trust? I suppose not. So why couldn't we have a system whereby we could sort of jointly find ways of having a similar kind of assessment and recommendation? And here I think Andreas' agency will be very important. I think one has to look into the role that the medical agency, the one who is taking decisions on the vaccines, the way that is taken. Can it be done more faster? Are there other procedures that could be followed? And I think we also need to look into what others do. The Americans, for instance, they have this biomedical agency which have a specific role when it comes to this kind of pandemic and things. Maybe we should have one like that. And in fact, Ursula von der Leyen has already proposed one and already set out the first sort of precursor for it. And then I think we need to reflect on decision making. How are decisions taken in these kind of pandemics, and where shall the responsibility be? And then we are entering into something which I think in the Swedish context will not be all that easy, because then there will be this, should it be at the level of the EU, or should it remain fully at the national level? I think this kind of discussion will be important, and it will be probably be important to have it going fairly early. Finally, when it comes to the external side, my sense is that if we are standing here, Gunnar, in 3 to 4 months' time, what we will discuss is how can we speed up the delivery of vaccines to the rest of the world. Because there's no way that we are able to overtake or to be able to meet this pandemic fully without having the rest of the world vaccinated. And the situation right now is dramatic when it comes to how little vaccine that has gone out. Here COVAX will play a very important role. Here individual member states will also play a very important role. And I know that Richard knows a lot about this. But I think that is going to be a real challenge for the future. And it will, from the European side, be very important that we do it together. That it is Europe moving forward and Europe being able to project our solidarity with the countries beyond. Today, 49 million vaccine doses have been distributed by COVAX, this international, which should be compared to the 164 million that are distributed within the EU. So I think this is going to be the bigger challenge externally in the future.
Thank you very much, Christian. May I just, you mentioned recommendations, and in the defense for different recommendations is normal that we are different, or at least we want to believe that we are all different. But isn't there some truth in that, for example, what is feasible in a country like Sweden wouldn't be that in a country like Italy, I mean, we are quite rural here. We have a lower density of population, etc. Isn't it so that it is difficult to have the same recommendations?
I would think, but we have experts here. But I would think I'm a bit stuck by some countries saying that Astra is good for people who are over 55. Others say it's good for people who are over 60. And others say it's over 65.
And first, it shouldn't be used for people over 65.
From
the beginning.
That's the point. And I think for trust in the vaccine rollout, where there is, as we know, skepticism, I think it's going to be important to have a common line on it. I agree with you that member states are different, that's for sure. But on that particular kind of recommendation, it seems to me that it would be logical to have a common line.
Sounds reasonable. Please, Richard.
No, it is difficult to explain to people why is it that we have a common regulatory system. I mean, everybody knows about the EMA. I think most people now know it's in Amsterdam. It used to be in London. It moved to Amsterdam for obvious reasons. That's a household name now. There's even live, it's like almost at the election days, live broadcast on all the channels when Emer Cook, the executive director of the EMA, when she's making statements, probably you as well, Andrea, across Europe. Household name, these agencies. So people know that. There's one regulatory system, yes, there are experts in every country. The workforce is very decentralized, experts in every country. Our Swedish Medical Products Agency, the Läkemedelsverket, they're part of the network. People know that. I think people now understand we have a portfolio. I'm involved in that. We have advanced purchase agreements by the Commission. We have access to the same vaccines, the same distributed proportionally based on population. But it is difficult to explain why you have these differences in recommendations. And I'm afraid that that's going to be even more difficult because we're going to face, after the summer, the issue about children and teenagers, where I already detect now different soundings from different countries, where the experts have different views. And maybe Andrea want to comment on this. This is your daily life, this conversation about, should you vaccinate school children because that's where you have the drive in the contagion? Is it not? The benefit risk is different in children and so on. Here in the north, we also have a particular experience with a very, very sad side effect from earlier pandemic vaccines with narcolepsy. People remember that, very stark memories of that. That plays into the local decision making. I'm not sure what the solution is, but it has its historical explanation, of course. The fact that the public health is a national competency, and this bit here is really squarely rooted in each member state. And I don't think there will be any quick solution to that. We have to continue to try and be as good as we can in explaining why these differences occur and why countries make different choices.
On the other hand, we all know that Danes are a little bit different than Swedes, etc. So
those are our favorite neighbors.
They can eat other food, etc. Andrea, what would you say is the shortcoming, the worst problem with these different recommendations as we have seen it?
Well, indeed, there are certain things where it's very difficult to convey why there are different decisions made in different countries, because the science is the same for all countries. And the age limit, for instance, is one of them. Not only now for AstraZeneca, but also for in general. But there are, of course, also decisions that need the knowledge of the local context. So unfortunately, it's not that easy to say, well, decisions should be made here or there. I think we have to be a bit more subtle, unfortunately. And but I agree, where there is a science base there, it should be possible to have a common understanding. This is where we set a threshold. And then also with a rationale that can be explained to the citizens, because they look everywhere else. They know that there are discrepancies, and that creates sort of doubts, which we cannot have actually. Right now, we should have everybody confident that the vaccines that are authorized are safe and effective. So there are things where we can strive in the future to have a bit more coordination. But I think there will still be situations and matters that have to be decided in a local context. I mean, I'm pretty much aware, because there is no way that I know what is the situation in a town in the border between two member states. There's just not this beyond what we can do at the EU level.
May I ask you all three a more philosophical question? So I don't know where I will get to when I raise this issue, but isn't it quite interesting that you, Richard, you started with it, that a lot of people thought it could take 4 or 10 years, and then suddenly in 10 months we had the vaccine, and now we are talking about the frustration of 1 or 2 or 3 months lag between different countries. That's another perspective to say. But what does that tell us, that science, so to say, overtook politics in a rather political project? I mean, it's science always develop on its own merits anyway, but this was a politically formed project, and then suddenly science jump forward. Well, I don't know what I'm asking about, but
no,
you know maybe the answer anyway.
No, you're absolutely right, and now I have to declare my bias is that I worked in the pharmaceutical industry for I started working with the Swedish government, actually, for the regulator, and I got my kind of basic training there, but then I've been in the industry, and it shows that this private sector interplay and interdependency at its best. Okay, I mean, take now these mRNA vaccines, which everybody talks about. Beautiful story actually around the Pfizer vaccine. It's actually this startup in Germany, BioNTech, two researchers born by immigrants from Turkey. Almost didn't get into to medical school. A fantastic story. And how did that come about? Well, it came about because they borrowed. There was risk capital, private investments, but also public money, both from the German federal government, but also from the EU programs, Horizon 2020, and before that FP6 and so on. So combination, that ecosystem delivered, and they decided in a few weeks' time to basically redirect their research from what they were doing, looking primarily at cancer medicines, to develop a vaccine. And then Pfizer showed up because they needed help. Obviously, if you go from a small-scale manufacturing to billions of doses, you need help. Just as AstraZeneca helped Oxford, and now Bayer is helping CureVac and so on. So you really see how the public and the private also knowing each other. It's not like the public is over here and the private is over here. They're so intertwined. We have the regulators that set high standards. We talk to them all the time. We've got payers that have views on what to charge, what to pay for medicines. We have funding, EU programs. In the US, we have NIH. We have BARDA, which is this agency. So all these people know each other and could very quickly mobilize. And it's actually an amazing team spirit there is. We have our fights with the companies. We can have tough negotiations on contracts and so on. But it really is, dear Pfizer friends or dear AstraZeneca friends is how the officials greet the company people. So I think there's a lot to study here. Also on this aspect of the public and private cooperation.
And maybe what we sometimes call the spontaneous order, things develop without exactly knowing. And this tells us, doesn't it, something about what sort of strategy could you have in the future? We were talking about the eggs in the basket, and maybe it's a good thing to have many baskets as well, because when we compare the development in different countries, EU contra UK, for example, or Israel or US, I think it's important to have this with you in the luggage. Do you understand what I mean, Christian?
Yeah, it's what you point to is essential, and as Richard pointed to, I think this is a very good example of this academia, public-private coming together on a joint project where everybody, I think, realized that this is just essential. If you listen to the CEO of AstraZeneca, he basically points to that we did this because we had such a strong interest in seeing to help civilization, to help the world a bit. So that's all fine. I think on the reflection on the future, I fully agree with Andrea. I mean, we're not talking about putting into a kind of centered structure which should decide everything. But there are issues that came out of this pandemic which I think we need to address. And one of them are the recommendations. Andrea, you pointed to it. We need to have a system whereby recommendations on scientifically based recommendations are coming out and are similar on similar vaccines, because otherwise I suppose people will lose trust. Another issue is what Richard pointed to, and that is how were the framework that was so good in the end, how did it come forward? This was haphazardous decisions which have not really been thought after. It was sort of try error, and I don't think that is the way to handle pandemic in the future. So we need to reflect on what is the kind of structure that the European Union will enter into next time we are in a pandemic. What kind of institutional structure do we need to have? What kind of roles will the different players have? And how can we see to that we are even more efficient than we were this time? And one element of that is already underway, and that is the big stock of protective equipment that is being built up, for instance, in Kristinehamn in Sweden, which is going to be for all the EU, so that we are prepared. So we don't have it was Lyon, in fact, but what happened in France or in other countries. Finally, I think it's also going to be important to have a system whereby we have some kind of understanding when are we closing borders and when are we not closing borders. I must say, I personally was a bit taken by the fact when I saw Swedish soldiers standing at the border to Norway, to put it bluntly. And I think here we need to have a reflection on what are the criteria. Is there something we can do without going into a centralized system whereby we have a certain agreement? This is how we do it, and this is how we don't do it, to avoid that we are having very negative effects on the internal market, or for that sake on the free movement.
Andrea, following this line just, and then we will go further on. This how to deal with uncertainties in an area where you see that science can have sudden jumps in different directions. What does that tell us about the strategies and need to have a common approach, but also have an open approach?
Well, I mean, basically, we have dealt with uncertainties from the moment we knew about this cluster in Wuhan, because it wasn't clear what it was about. The knowledge evolved day by day in the first half year, and it's still evolving. So the approach is that we have taken is saying, what are we certain about? Where don't we know things? I think you have to be clear what is certain and what you don't know, and then to work with scenarios, because I mean, of course, you don't know how things will develop, and then you work with scenarios, and you can then associate certain measures and actions with these scenarios, so that when the real development, the real world development shows development to one of these scenarios, you have already a package ready. So, I mean, we are now working on how could the end of this pandemic look like. There are also different scenarios. We don't know how it will look like. So to also develop a plan how to get to the best possible scenario. So that's the only way how you can deal with this situation where you don't know everything, and where things are still being discovered, and new knowledge is generated every day.
If we take it from there, we will probably meet new pandemics, or at least we shall be prepared for that, and we will also see that this pandemic can have its new variants or mutations of different kinds. If we take the lessons, what are the most important lessons learned from now regarding how the structure should be, but also how decision making should be? Would you like to try that?
Yes, no, so I think, and I think it was Christian who alluded to the fact that the Commission President has put forward a tentative proposal. Detailed proposal will come towards the end of the year. For a research health emergency response agency, HERA, which is modeled, I have to admit, on the US, on BARDA, which is an agency that actually, I mean, we should be very thankful for the US government that they have been plowing billions into funding various projects for what we call preparedness against the unknown unknowns, if you remember the famous quote by Donald Rumsfeld. So they, we should be very thankful for that. So that's one thing, to have that infrastructure in place. And the other thing, which we have seen now in the last few weeks, which made me very happy, was to see that the member states, including the big ones, had no hesitation whatsoever to say that for the coming years, we do this together. Because we got the question from the companies saying, oh, by the way, 2022, what are you going to do? Are we going to have a private market for this? Are we going to deal with you each with your own national procurement? No. Now we've learned something. And in fact, I think also we've had a little bit of turmoil. It's been also reported in the press about some dealings between the member states on those. Some people had a little bit more than the others. This has galvanized the collaboration, and the fact that the Commission got the mandate from the member states to go and sign contracts for billions of doses for 2022, 2023, to have the capacity to deal with the variants. That is quite something. So this will stay on, and many of my colleagues, former colleagues also in the pharmaceutical industry and others, are reflecting and say, oh, what does this mean? What does this mean for the future, for the role of the EU in terms of procurement and pricing and all these things?
But if a lot of people do look upon US and Israel, and UK, and UK, people in UK say this is because we are out of EU. Some of this approaches do irritate me because they forget a number of different things. But I think regarding lessons learned, how could we have moved more rapidly? Is it true that they were more efficient? Well, I have my answer, but it would be good to have a round from all of you here. Then I will give the right answer.
I have a go first, then, and then I'll hand over to Christian. But on this issue, the main reason why the UK, and we should congratulate them. They were actually in a worse place than all other EU members. I still call them member states. I've not gotten used to this Brexit thing yet. But they were really in a bad position in terms of number of death cases and spread of the disease. Okay, so the fact that they've come so far, it's good. It's very good for all of us, actually. But they did that for two reasons. One is that they took an emergency authorization. Okay, actually at that time still under EU legislation, because they were technically a member of the EU, which involves also that there's no liability for the company, and also the fact that you didn't do all the reviews that you should have done. Okay, I think it was a very good decision by the EU member states not to give emergency authorization for these vaccines. Because as it was alluded to, Andrea commented on this briefly, the vaccine hesitancy that we have in many member states, it would have been even worse.
Absolutely.
What's the point of rushing it if people don't want to take the vaccine? Yes, it was a few weeks later than the US and the UK. That's true, but I think it was worth it. Then also the UK they have contracts which secured that the AstraZeneca vaccine, for instance, manufactured in the UK could not be exported. Even though it was also in our contract, that same factory, which is now subject to a dispute with the company. What we've learned, Gunnar, is that, unfortunately, coming from the industry, we have to be a bit more suspicious. We have to be suspicious about contracts and capacities, that companies don't promise things that they can't deliver on, that they don't sign double contracts for the same factories, more penalties on delays and things like that. And also we've learned on communication. I think we were pretty good here in Sweden in moderating the expectations. I always said we were done by summer. Summer. So even if we should have had a faster start in January, February, March, particularly with AstraZeneca, the expectations was always they would take the whole 6 months before we finished. But in some member states, I don't think it was that clear. So when V-Day, you start on December 27th, I think it was, many people thought, wow, now it'll go fast. So unless you repeatedly said what I said, summer, of course people got very disappointed in February, March when they didn't get the vaccines.
Andrea, what would you like to add to that or complement or maybe correct? Would you have preferred a more rapid acceptance for the vaccines?
Well, I think all in all, I don't see an alternative to how it was done. I think many of the smaller member states would not have had access to a vaccine in the way they have now if the approach had been different. But I want to come back a bit on the future, what you mentioned, and how we learn the lessons. I think the legal proposals that have been put forward in November by the Commission and are now discussed by the Council and the Parliament on a revised mandate for EMA, for ECDC, and for cross-border health threats. This is encapsulating the lessons learned so far, that we have to modernize our surveillance, that we have to invest more in preparedness plans that are also interoperable among the member states, with a EU task force that can support member states if they are sort of short of capacity, and the international collaboration. And to the general discussion, faster or together, there is this beautiful African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And if you're used to going together, maybe we can also go fast together.
That was a very good phrase. I must remember that. If you want to go far, you must go together. That's a good point.
Yeah.
Is it red tape that did the difference when we look around the world?
No, I don't think so. I don't have indication that that is the case. Maybe, I mean, this is part of what Andrea points to, the lessons learned in terms of the changes of the roles of ECDC and EMA, and also preparedness, the kind of preparedness elements. If we would have that in place, maybe it would probably have gone faster, and it would probably have we would have been prepared to another extent. We would be prepared to another extent. But I think.
But would the volume of vaccine be bigger?
No. This is where I come to, because I think the major issue here has been production. I mean, if you look on why we didn't get the volumes that was overpromised, we could say, in a sense, in some member states, it was because it's complex and complicated to produce vaccine, and it took longer time for, I think, all the producers more or less than what they expected themselves, and we shouldn't be surprised for that, because this was virgin territory. This was vaccines they've never been into, and if you take these new vaccines that you refer to, Richard, I understand this is very much virgin territory. So I think that's important. But you mentioned Israel as well, and I think it's important to bring that up. United States is, as Andrea said, and you, Richard, they are prepared for this to an extent that we are not. They have the BARDA, they have already invested in many scenarios and so on, so they can play that one faster. Now on Israel, Richard knows it better than me, but my understanding is that what happened there was that Israel said, listen, Pfizer, if you come to us, you will get access to our health information system. And of course, for a producer, that is very interesting. But Andrea, I don't think in Europe we would be able to do that, simply because that kind of information is in our world part of integrity and something that I own myself. But I think this explained why Pfizer was so interested to go for Israel very fast, and that explained also the very successful rollout in Israel, which they should be congratulated for.
I think if I may say a reflection about that, in a time of uncertainties and where you will have new phases of uncertainties, when new variants are emerging or new pandemics emerging, of course, if you take a risk, you can win, but you can also lose. And the risk that you will lose, if not the first time, but the second time or the third time, is of course growing. And I think Andreas' phrase of if you go together, you can go further. That's an important thing, because it could have been that it hadn't worked the way, and it could have been that the anti-vaccine movement in Europe could have grown. So I think it's important to have all this in your head when you discuss it. We are soon coming to end this webinar, and I would like to give you all three a question. I will give you room to say whatever you want in reality. To just say, how is the virus development now? How do you look upon the mutations or variants? And where will we be in June? And you can do this you can get 2 minutes, all of you. That's what we had in European Parliament, and that was always enough for me. So I hope it's enough for you as well. So please, well, we start with Andrea this time.
Okay. Viruses mutate, so that's inherent. So they mutate if they get the chance. If there's a lot of transmission going, then they will mutate. So we have to bring down the transmission by reducing the case numbers and accelerating the vaccine rollout. Then we get sort of can reduce the rate of mutations. So the goal is really getting the case numbers down and rolling out the vaccine now. And we just have to plow through. And what I see is regularly, steadily improving, increasing numbers of people vaccinated in all of Europe. And that's the way to go.
Fantastic. Richard?
No, I agree. I'll add to that. And the only way to deal with the transmission is to vaccinate. I mean, societies worldwide are essentially shut down anyhow, so you can't do much more in terms of restrictions. And face masks are worn everywhere these days, including to some extent here in Sweden. So it's really about vaccines, okay? And that's why it's so important, as you touched upon in your introduction, Gunnar, the fact that we come to a point, or Christian, that we need to share the result of our overinvestments. The EU will have the second half of this year up to 1 billion doses. What really puzzles me is that in all these maps that you get from the Economist, Intelligence Unit and others, and they talk about the availability of vaccines, it's like people presume that we will throw them away. The enormous surplus that the EU has will be shared. And that's underway. It's branded Team Europe. It'll be a combination of donations to COVAX. It'll be reselling to countries like Japan and others that can pay. So that's, for me, in addition to the preparedness for the mutations and variants with that capacity I mentioned, this is the second top priority, is to get going on sharing doses. And it starts now. Yesterday was announced by the Swedish government 1 million doses of AstraZeneca donated to COVAX. And that's just the beginning.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, I will just hang on to Richard here, because I think that is the essential task now, to see to that COVAX and the other sharing system that exists, that you really get it moving, because there are too few people that has been vaccinated outside Europe and outside the industrial world. And if you look on from CNN to Swedish news and see what's happening in India right now, which by the way is a big vaccine producer, you can see what can happen. And that's why it's so important to get it moving in Africa, in the rest of Asia, and in Latin America. And here the European Union will play a very, very important role. We are already, I think, the biggest donor to COVAX by far, and more will come. And as Richard points to, there are a number of member states that now are already indicated the willingness that through COVAX donate vaccine that will then go out for this purpose. Sweden being one, France I think have done it as well, and I'm sure there will become others as well.
Thank you. So on behalf of the Swedish Pan-Europa Association, and if I may, on behalf of the EU Commission in Stockholm, we would like to thank you three here and all of you. And I think some takeaways is that the need for open borders in order to enable the fascinating rapid development of vaccine that we could see, but also in order to have the capacity to produce everywhere. Open, open, open. And the second thing is, of course, many baskets and many eggs. And many eggs need many baskets. But that, I mean, from a more structural approach, that is important. I also think about what Andrea mentioned. If you want to go far, you must go together, but then you can go fast as well. And this is not the end of history. We will have new challenges, and I think we are intellectually but also structurally better prepared now. So thank you once again. This was a very fascinating seminar, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.